Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. I'm so excited to introduce you today to Hilary Cocalis. Hilary is the founder and chief go-getter, what a title, of Sipwell Wine Company, a premium award-winning craft wine brand that launched in 2021. And it just so happens they're also a canned wine brand. Before starting on her entrepreneurial journey, Hilary was the VP of marketing at Ballast Point Brewing Co. and has over a decade of both client-side and agency experience in both food and beverage. She also currently serves as a consultant and advisor to emerging brands and is on the board of directors for the San Diego Blood Bank. I don't know where this girl finds all this time. She lives with her husband and 2 daughters in California. Now, Hilary and I have worked together a couple times now, and she is such a true joy to get to work with. All of her wines are so delicious, and I absolutely love the joy and excitement that she's bringing to the world of wine. If you can't tell already, Cork and Fizz is all about making the world of wine more approachable and just plain fun, and Hilary knows how to do that. She dissolves all the pretension that seems to follow wine and makes it delicious, high quality, and fun, all in a can. She also doesn't shy away from tough topics like sustainability, which is something we're going to talk about today. She'll also be revealing what makes her cans unique from other canned wines. And trust me, you'll want to keep listening to discover the innovative technique that she uses. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Yeah, why don't we start out just by learning a bit more about you? I know, we've kind of discussed your story before, and I think it's super cool that you started in the beer world, though glad you came to the right side of fermentation, over here in wine. Could you dive into that a little bit, how you got into wine and what sparked the start of Sipwell?
Sure. Yeah. So I did start in beer, at least professionally, and probably as a drinker too. Started as a beer drinker, but I was the head of marketing at Ballast Point Brewing here in San Diego. And so really kind of in the industry, got my feet wet learning about beer and brewing and how to market a good premium quality craft beer. And so I learned a lot. For those who follow the industry, Ballast Point during my time there was acquired by Constellation Brands. And Constellation is one of the largest wine, beer, spirits companies in the country. And so that was a cool experience because then we got to be part of a much larger organization. And that was my first experience learning more about how the wine side of the business operates. I still worked in beer day to day, but we had colleagues in wine, got to, go to the Constellation wineries and talk to those folks. And I personally also found that I was drinking more wine at home. I think, at the end of the day, when you're selling beer all day, kind of the last thing you want to drink when you get home is another IPA. And so I found that I was drinking more wine at home at the end of the workday. And I have 2 small kids and didn't want to have to open a whole bottle, didn't want to drink multiple glasses. I wanted a glass, maybe a glass and a half, and found that there wasn't a good way to do that in a single serving. So either you open a whole bottle and you feel pressure to drink it, or you have to cork it and it might go bad. Or, there are other little single serve bottles, but they're not great. And so because coming from craft beer, where like some of the best quality beer does come in a can, I sort of asked myself, why isn't there better quality wine in a can?
Yes.
And that was it. That was sort of the aha moment to start Sipwell.
I love it. So what was like the first kind of those first few steps that you took to create this, right? You had this idea in your head, and I'm so curious how you take it from like that idea to then creating Sipwell.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for me, with a marketing background, I started with the brand concept first. So how do I position this brand? What do I name it? What kinds of wine should we think? What kinds of products do we want? What does the packaging look like? I dove into all that stuff first because that's where like my expertise is, and it's also the fun stuff. It's the fun stuff, and then so I had a brand and I had a great idea, and I started talking to people about it. Is this interesting to you? Would you buy this wine? What do you want out of canned wine? So I started doing some like unofficial kind of customer research and stuff too. And then I had to figure out how to make the wine.
Just that small part, right?
Just that part of it. And even how to like get permitted as a winery, going through all the permitting piece of it, which luckily with experience in the alcohol industry, I know the compliance side a little bit. So that wasn't as much of a learning curve as I think it is for other people. But even still, I think for me, the biggest piece of the puzzle that we had to solve is where and how to make the wine. Because I'm not a winemaker, but I know what I like. I know the types of wine I want to drink. I know the flavor profiles. And so started just reaching out. I'm in San Diego, but started looking at some of the other wine regions in the state. So, looked up in Napa and Sonoma. And then the more I talked to folks and the more I explored it, the Paso Robles region seemed to make a lot of sense. It's closer to our home base in Southern California. There's really great quality of wine. There's a lot of wine in that area. It's the biggest wine producing county in the state. I don't think a lot of people know that. And also just a great community that was really open to me coming in as a new producer, a small producer, and trying to help me figure it out. And so hooked up with a winemaker in Paso Robles who serves as our host winery. And then we just kind of went from there. So sourcing grapes, figuring out the wines, all of that stuff. So that process took the majority of the time before we launched. I would say that took about a year from both just a permitting and winemaking and production standpoint to get us ready to put wine into a can.
Wow. I love it. I love that you started with like start with what you know, right? Like start there, learn a little bit about or do your thing. And then also just like asking people what they wanted out of it. Cause I feel like that is a big thing. Like so much of the wine, the wine world just does things the way things have always been done. And then I think that brings a pretentious kind of feel to it. And so people are afraid to approach it. And you're like, I want something that you see in the store or whatnot that like, you're like, I want to try that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point. And I think I'm sort of an outsider enough to this industry that I can bring that new perspective without having a lot of tradition and preconceived notions about what winemaking should be and how we need to go about it. And, it's been such a learning curve. I think a lot of the stuff we kind of happened into by chance, but seemed to work out well. And so all this stuff that without having that, preconceived knowledge, we've been able to get pretty lucky too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we kind of talked a little bit about the fun side, but I also feel like your brand doesn't shy away from like some of the harder topics, like things like sustainability. You guys are all about sustainability, and I know that word, at least for me, can be kind of tricky in the wine world because it can be used simply in a marketing sense, right? Of like I know a lot of bigger brands will put, say like, oh, we're all about sustainability because it can just mean like it can mean a lot of different things. So what does sustainability mean for Sipwell?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it is tough because, the goal with any brand and company is to avoid the greenwashing thing, right? Like to really mean it when you are talking about it. And we try really hard to mean it when we're talking about sustainability. We have what we call a sip responsibly pledge. And, a lot of folks in the industry talk about drinking responsibly. And for the most part, that means moderation, right? Not overconsumption. For us, we're taking that responsibility word and applying it to other things. So that also means a responsibility to the planet. And so that's kind of the heart of where our like sustainability ethos comes from. Part of the appeal of going into a can, not only that it's a good single serving, but is that it's a much more sustainable package than wine in glass bottles. And I'm not anti-wine and glass. I mean, there's plenty of wines that need to be in glass bottles. A cab that you're going to age for 10 years needs to be in a bottle. But I think for the vast majority of the wine drinking that we're doing, where it's everyday occasions and things like that, there's a lot of arguments to be made for why cans are more sustainable for the wine.
Yeah.
That aluminum is infinitely recyclable. An aluminum can is already made from majority recycled material. So it's a total closed loop recycling process. Glass is recyclable too, but not to the level that aluminum is.
Sure.
And then just from a format, it's much smaller. It takes less packaging to ship. It's not fragile or not as fragile. So you don't have to put as much packaging around it to ship it. And it's lighter. So, just from an overall carbon footprint of getting wine in a can from point A to point B is about 50% less than wine in a bottle. And so there's a lot of benefits to the package itself. But the other thing is we didn't want to just stop there. I think a lot of folks who are looking at alternative packaging and wine are not thinking about the wine making aspect as it relates to sustainability. And we wanted to make sure that the wine in the can was just as sustainable as the package itself. And so we look to source organic grapes whenever possible. And then our bare minimum is certified sustainable vineyards.
Okay. Can you share a little bit of the difference between like the levels? I know you've kind of talked about it before, where like the levels of sustainable, organic, biodynamic, what's the difference?
Yeah, so there's kind of four main levels for winemaking. So the basic is just conventional winemaking. This is, like any conventional farming, they're using pesticides, they're, probably using irrigation, not really looking at water conservation. They're using chemicals to keep pests away. That's conventional farming and is probably the majority of how wine grapes are grown. The next level up from that is sustainable farming, which is by and large looking at like water use, I think is the main part of it. So how are you doing this most sustainably? Are you dry farming, which means no additional irrigation? Are you using, herbicides and stuff that are natural, more sustainable for the environment? The next level above that is organic, which there's a whole bunch of parameters around what requires for organic farming. It's, no pesticides, no chemicals, no herbicides. And then the highest level and most intense level is biodynamic, which is really a very holistic farming practice. I even don't really know all the ins and outs of it. I know there's something related to, the lunar cycle and how that works and how that affects farming. And a lot of that is very much like the whole ecosystem of the vineyard. So a lot of people planting other plants in between the vines and things like that. And so what's important is that those levels above conventional farming all have their own like third-party certifications. And so a lot of vineyards will do those practices, but not go through the certification because it takes a lot of time. It's very expensive for a small grower to do. So we kind of look at that as our baseline. So our baseline is a certified sustainable vineyard. So it's sustainable farming that's been certified by a third party. And then from there, our goal is to do 100% organic grapes or better in the future.
Exciting. Yeah, I love it. And I love too, like you brought up the point too, that like there are the different ways to be certified with this, but it is I've heard it's very expensive to do it and it takes a lot of time. And so like you might be using grapes from a certified sustainable winery, but chances are they're doing organic or biodynamic practices.
Right, exactly.
And not, I think that's super important to keep that in mind because a lot of the small guys don't have that opportunity, but there's a good chance that small producer that you're enjoying wine from is, sourcing grapes made in similar ways.
Right.
Yeah, I love it. So I wanted to go back to, you talked about with the cans, right? We talked about the cans are, a more sustainable and easier to recycle. And we talked about certain wines are meant to be in, can do well in cans and others that can't. And one thing that I know is like aging, right? Like a can, you probably like you buy it, you should probably drink it in what, like the year that you purchase it in or within a year?
Ideally within a year. What we say is our max shelf life is 2 years.
Okay.
And the company is about 2 years old now, so we're testing that. I have some quote library wines sitting where I'm, some of the very first wines that we canned, and they're still tasting good. So I think the max I would say 2 years in a can. It's really meant to be drank fresh. If we're selling one of our cans to you, we want you to consume it within 6 months to a year. So yeah, I mean the one limitation for cans is that it isn't meant for a wine that is meant to be aged because there's no oxygen transfer. There's nothing from, that you get from the benefit of the bottle for an aged wine.
Right. Which honestly, I think is fine. I remember hearing a stat the other day where like it's a very high percentage of wines in the US that are like purchased and drank within what, like a week of, of purchasing. And I'm sure a lot of listeners, would find that they tend to go out, buy a wine that they're going to drink that night or that weekend. And so it fits very well for the canned wines.
Right, exactly. The vast majority of wine purchases, I think even there's a stat it even gets more what's the word for it? Like more last minute for champagne. I think champagne is the vast majority of champagne that's purchased is consumed within 6 hours of purchase. So it's,
Wow.
you know, for sparkling wine, even it's crazy.
So speaking of sparkling wine, a lot of your canned wines are sparkling, but they're made in a way that's different from a lot of the sparkling canned wines that you see on the market. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's something we're really excited about. So, what we say, how we describe it is that our sparkling wines are can conditioned. And the difference there is that we're not carbonating the wine. So, we're not just taking wine and putting CO2 into it like you would carbonate a soda. We're also not doing tank method sparkling, which means like fermenting it in a tank and then putting that into the can. What's unique about how we do it is that the wine actually goes through secondary fermentation directly in the can. So, we take champagne yeast, we take a little bit of sugar for the yeast to eat, and we put all of that into the can without it being pressurized or carbonated. And then we seal the can, and the can itself acts as a mini fermentation vessel to create the sparkling wine. And the reason we do that is it's a way to kind of mimic champagne method in a can. So that's how champagne is made in a bottle. We wanted to mimic that in the can. To be perfectly honest, it was totally out of necessity. The winery that we use doesn't have larger tanks that would allow us to do, larger fermentation of sparkling wine. And so I kind of went back to my beer roots and home brewing roots and know that this happens a lot in beer and cider where they use can conditioning. And
Yeah.
so we started playing around with that method and it worked pretty well. And we were really happy because the quality of the wine that comes out is much better. So you get a smaller bubble that's more of like a champagne style bubble. And then what's cool about our process is that the wine basically sits on the lees the whole time. So once the fermentation process is done in the can, what's left of that yeast that's done its job is it sits there and it helps the wine to develop flavor and also helps to preserve its freshness over the 2 years or so that you would have it in the can.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. So anybody listening, if you're not super familiar, so fermentation is that the process that turns essentially you have the grape juice with sugar, right? And then Hilary talked about where you add yeast. So you have the yeast eats the sugar, produces alcohol and carbon dioxide. And when we're making a sparkling wine, they typically do that fermentation process twice. So it'll go through, the yeast will eat all the sugar and it'll produce the wine, which has the alcohol. And we don't care about the carbon dioxide that first time. But the second time is when you're making a sparkling wine, you want to trap it. So it's super cool that at Hilary at Sipwell, when they do this, they do it inside the can, which is exactly the same, like you said, that they do in champagne, the highest of the highest ends of sparkling wine, right? Where they'll put more sugar, more yeast in the bottle with the wine and let it ferment. And like you said, another term you used here that I think it means a lot to me, but if you're new to wine, having it on the lees. So those lees are essentially dead yeast, right? They're the yeast after they've done their work. And it gives it, like, to me, it ends up giving like some like bready toast, sometimes some creamier. It makes the wine a little bit fuller in body, gives it a little more richness as well, which to me always speaks like high-end sparkling wine.
Yeah, that's what this is. It's champagne in a can.
I love it. Champagne in a can. I can't go wrong with that.
And thank you for those explanations. You did a much better job of going through that
you're good.
for the non-knowledgeable drinker.
Yeah, it's always good to have a little background on those. I know when I'm listening, I'm like, yeah, that's so cool, right?
Yeah.
Having the background is fun. So I know. So talking about your wines, you have a small but mighty selection to choose from, and you just added a new rosé, Perfect Day, which I haven't tried yet, but I got to get an order in so I can give that a try. Do you ever find yourself standing in front of the wine aisle at the grocery store, feeling completely lost and overwhelmed? Don't worry, you're not alone. But what if I told you that I have a way to transform the wine aisle from overwhelming into an endless sea of joy and discovery? And it involves drinking wine and joining the most welcoming and fun community. In my Court Crew Virtual Tasting Club, we're all about exploring new and exciting wines in a fun and supportive community. No more feeling intimidated or stuck in a rut of buying the same bottle of wine. Each month, we explore 2 new wines so you can broaden your palate and explore new flavors. Not only will we taste these wines together, but we'll learn about where the wines come from, essentially traveling the world all through the wine in our glass. Come join the Court Crew, and you'll have the opportunity to taste new wines, meet winemakers and other wine professionals, and connect with like-minded wine lovers from all over the world. Imagine the joy of discovering a new favorite wine and being able to confidently choose a bottle that you know you'll love. So, why not join us? Head to my website at corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew to sign up. And don't forget to use code WINE101 to get your first month free. And now, back to the show. How do you decide which grapes to use and which new wines to create?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think it starts with what we want to drink. So like, what do I like drinking? At least our initial releases was all based on what I like. So we have a sparkling red wine, which is called Go Getter, which is pretty unconventional, but I really like light, dry Lambrusco. I know you're a Lambrusco fan too. And so that was very much inspired by the fact that like, I like Lambrusco. I'm going to make a wine that tastes like Lambrusco.
Yeah. So if you didn't catch that, listeners, that's a sparkling red wine, which I think
you
is
drink
so
it cold. Cool. Yeah. You drink it cold. It's very refreshing, especially in summertime. So that's really, I mean, the long and short of it is, are there grape varieties that we like that we want to see? And also what makes sense for where we produce it. So because we're getting wine from the Central Coast, we kind of work with those grape varietals. It's a lot of traditional Rhone style varieties, so Grenache, things like that. And so we kind of work with the varieties that make sense for the region. For the most part, there's not a lot of like Sauvignon Blanc in that area, which would make it hard for us to do. That's not to say it's impossible, but kind of where we're sourcing, we look at what makes sense for the grape varieties and then fit that to the type of wines we want to drink. Perfect Day is our brand new rosé. We have a sparkling rosé, which is our bestseller. That one's called Rocksteady. But in the process of sharing Rocksteady with folks and talking to people, a lot of people asked for a rosé without bubbles. You know, I love rosé, but I don't love sparkling wines. Or I also really like a good still rosé and felt like that was kind of a gap in our program. And so we found these really great organic Grenache grapes that felt like they would fit better for a rosé than making a true Grenache. And so we said, let's go for it. Let's make a rosé of Grenache. And it turned out amazing. I'm super happy with the quality of it, super happy with the result. I definitely need to send you some so you can try it because I'd love to know your thoughts. But it's like very light, refreshing, you know, kind of Provence style. Like it's pretty light, it's direct press rosé. But yeah, super great summertime fun wine.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So I know you just released a new one, but I always love to ask people in the wine world, like, if you could pick any grape, is there like a style of wine or a grape that you haven't had a chance to make yet that would be like, you would jump at the chance to if it came up?
Ooh, that is a really good question.
I know I didn't prepare you for this one. This one just always comes up whenever I'm talking wine.
There's, you know, it's funny. There's like styles of wines that I really love, but I don't know how they do in a can. And also like, it's hard to find those grapes in California if we're doing California. Like I really love Gruner Veltliner, but I'm like, not a lot of people make it. I think it would be hard to find it. And I also think that's maybe a hard sell out of a can.
I don't know, like, man. I've had Gruner Veltliner out of a can.
Yeah.
It was, you just have to have a lot of fun. I think I'm trying to think of the label. God, who is it? Alloy Wine Company or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they have like a super fun label on it too. So I think people don't really know that it's Gruner. They're just like, "Ooh, look at that cool label." And then they're like, "Ooh, this is a good wine."
And like up where you are, Washington does so well with those like Rieslings and like those more like cooler weather grapes that it makes sense. I think I'd be shocked if there was someone making Gruner and Paso Robles. That's like the bench of California. But that, I mean, I think like I'm very intrigued by orange wine. And so thinking, you know, is there a way that we can do an orange wine in a can? We still don't, I'm back on the subject of Gruner, we still don't have a good still white wine. So we're looking at doing a still white wine in a can. So it's fun. I mean, we're kind of playing around with it. The benefit of being such a young business is we have a lot of flexibility. And the benefit of not we don't have our own estate vineyard. So we're not limited by the grapes that we're growing ourselves. We get to source from producers that we like and what's available. And so that kind of gives us more room to play with what's there and try something out. And if it works, great. And if not, we'll make something else the next year.
I love it. I'm like very looking forward to when you come up with an orange wine in a can, because I think that's going to be so cool.
Yeah, it would be cool. A lot of people ask us for it. I just haven't, again, now it's a winemaking challenge. Like in my marketing brain, I can like see the marketing and the brand and I'm like, okay, now I got to figure out how to make the wine for it.
Right. No, I love it. Okay. So I have to ask you before we go, what inspired you to choose like such uplifting and fun names for your wines? We have Perfect Day, Tiny Victories, Rock Steady. Is there like a story behind each one, or what kind of led to this?
Each one does have a little bit of a story, or kind of where we found the name from. I, again, like was starting to think about how to build Sipwell and how to build these as wine brands. And so I honestly have just like a running list in my notes app of things that I think are good names. So if I hear a lyric from a song or someone says a phrase and I'm like, oh man, that would be interesting. Tiny Victories is the one we came up with first, because the whole idea with that, and that's our sparkling white wine. So like, if there's wine for special occasions like champagne, then there should be wine for the tiny victories. There should be wine for the little things that are worth celebrating that you might not be thinking about deserves that moment of celebration. And so, and the whole philosophy behind all of the names and kind of behind our approach to how we want you to enjoy the wine is we want to reframe wine drinking to be more about celebration than it is about coping or stress or trying to do the other thing. I think there's a lot of negative association with wine drinking, especially women. How do women consume wine? Are they doing it because they like can't handle their day, and so they're like knocking out back that like giant glass of wine? And so we're trying to reframe it to be more mindful and be more positive, so that you're bringing a positive mindset to drinking our wine. And part of that comes with the name of the wine itself. So even before you drink it, you're in a good mood because you're thinking about tiny victories. You're thinking about your perfect day, that sort of thing.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of that idea of like, oh, I got to have that glass of wine to, because I've had such a rough day. Right. And like nothing against it, but I love the idea of kind of turning it. And you could even just turn it just slightly where it's like, oh yeah, I survived the day. That's right. A victory in and of itself. I'm going to have some sparkling wine.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I love it. Okay. Well, before we leave, I want you to share, where can people find your wines if they're interested in trying them?
Yeah, good question. So the easiest way would be directly on our website. So if you go to sipwell.co, you can order directly from us, and we ship pretty much nationwide. And then for anybody listening who's based in Southern California, we have a good amount of distribution in retail, and we have a list of all of our retailers in Southern California on our website as well. So I would tell folks to head to the website first and either order from there or find a store near them to grab it.
Cool. I love it. And I love on the website, you have like a build your own box, right? Where you can like pick your own. I'm such a variety girl. So like, I love all your wines. So I'd easily buy a box of all, but it's also nice when I could just like make my own little box of all my favorites.
Yeah, we've got a build your own box. We have a couple of variety packs where we will choose it for you. We have an all sparkling variety pack. We've got what we call our signature box, which would be all of our current releases in a set. And then we also have some themed gift boxes too. So we have a birthday box. We just released a congrats box. So for anyone you want to congratulate for new house or promotion or graduation, we've got that too.
Fine. And you have a code that you're sharing right with the audience here. It's Fizz, FIZZ. It's 15% off on the website, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So
cool.
Check us out and use the code.
Yeah, it's delicious wine. I'd recommend all of them. Like, I don't even know. I think Tiny Victories might be my favorite just by like a hair. I do love that like champagne in a can situation. And I know you've done, I know you've done Albarino in the past. Is the newest vintage also of Albarino, or has it changed?
Yes. Yeah, no, Tiny Victories is still sparkling Albarino.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Very fun. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Hilary. I had a really fun time talking to you.
Thanks, Haley. Thanks for having me. This was great.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Cheers.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I had such a fun time talking to Hilary and learning more about how she started her brand and what they do at Sipwell to try to improve sustainability. If you're interested in trying their wines, which I highly recommend you give those a try, you can find them at local spots down in California, but you can also order online at sipwell.co and use code FIZZ, F-I-Z-Z, to get 15% off your purchase. Now, if you love this episode as much as I did, I would really appreciate if you could take a quick second to rate it and leave a review. And if you know a wine lover in your life that would enjoy it, please share it with them. It would mean the world to me. In next week's episode, I'll be teaching you everything you need to know about everyone's favorite summer wine, rosé. Now, hopefully by the end of it, I'll have you convinced that this should be your favorite style of wine year-round. So, thanks again for listening. And if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in exploring new wines and joining an incredible community of wine lovers, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. Use code WINE101 to get your first month absolutely free. Cheers!